Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LLG vlog. I'm Helen McGrath, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and I'm joined this week by Dennis Hall, our Bulletin Editor. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Helen.
So, Dennis, what subject have you picked for us to discuss today?
Well, inevitably, we're going to have to look at OFLOG. It came under scrutiny last week at the Parliamentary Accounts Committee. Now, I know we've looked at it before, but it's important we take a look at what was said by these officials during this probing of their role in this new organisation that the government have set up. Can I say this as well, Helen? You're quite right what you said last week. There are some topics that we simply can't shake off the news agenda at the moment, even if we tried. You mentioned AI and data protection. And the third issue is inevitably OFLOG, this new government body, as I mentioned. Now, to what was said at this parliamentary committee, OFLOG will not name and shame councils, but will be firm. So said Lord Morse during his evidence during the Levelling Up Committee in Parliament. Now, Helen, you've covered OFLOG, as I mentioned. You've looked at the published strategy in the grapevine last week, but doubts still remain and have been compounded by the latest comments in Parliament about its future role. Now, Lord Morse and Josh Goodman, OFLOG's interim chair and chief executive, respectively, highlighted, of course, the three priorities of the new office. First, to inform citizens, to warn of possible council failures, and to support local government. But the question is, how will they do this? Many commentators across local government media are suspicious, frankly, about the real role of this new body. Will it be a new audit commission, just under a new name? Well, coming before a parliamentary committee gave MPs the opportunity to probe OFLOG's most senior officials about how the new body will operate. Helen.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at that. But I think, the corporate plan you referenced there, that's out for consultation, as I said last week. In there was this theme about alerting councils to the fact that they might be failing. But I think some of the metrics being gathered, there's a question as to whether or not it will actually achieve that aim. And I know that local government bodies have raised concerns about the Office for Local Government being subject to political direction. I know that in the written evidence to the committee's inquiry, the Local Government Association certainly raised concerns about the potential implications on public trust. But do you think, OFLOG, in terms of their formal public reports on council performance, do you think that's going to be helpful? Or will it be a little bit of a ticking off, a little bit of finger wagging?
Well, Helen, you've touched the very point that was raised during the parliamentary committee, and this is what Lord Morse said. He said, if OFLOG has dialogue with the council, it is likely to result in a written report, which will be published and available for members of the public to look at. So whether it's described as finger wagging or not, it's going to be something beyond just persuasion. After all, when there's a public report, local authorities are bound to look at it. It's bound to be influential. It may very well give rise to change and provoke action. This is a serious matter. This isn't just a report. It's a report that will have some impact. And when questioned about how publishing a report is not naming and shaming councils, the chief executive, Goodman, said, he outlined that the report's aimed at trying to help councils rather than trying to catch people out. But there could be a bit of that in this process.
I think it's necessarily going to make councils nervous, isn't it? And, senior officers are going to come under a lot of pressure. I can't imagine if a report's published, your leader's going to be particularly happy about it. So, there's going to be extra stress from this. But I think you do have to take OFLOG at face value, to be honest, Dennis, certainly at the outset. I mean, despite the incident with the Times, where Lord Morse he was quoted as saying poor governance is to blame for financial failure and not lack of funding. And of course, he was at pains after that to say it was taken out of context, and he rode back significantly and seemed to be quite upset about that coverage. But I think, as an entity, you've got to hand it to them. They really have gone some way in order to try and reassure the sector, I think.
Yes, well, Goodman did exactly what you've said there. He did say during the committee that it's all about the style of the way in which the reporting is done, the style and way in which the dialogue takes place with local authorities. I sense from what both these officials said is that they don't want to ruffle feathers and they don't want to disturb people's attitude towards them. They want to have make a good account of themselves. And I think they genuinely do want to be helpful. But there are some doubts in the sector still about whether this role first is needed, whether it's something else, and whether this could be performed, this reporting arrangement could be organised without the need for this new body being in place.
Yeah, well, as I understand it, they're going to the reports will make recommendations, won't they? But I don't believe that there's going to be any legal powers attached to the enforcement of that. It's a bit, and it'll be interesting to see whether people kind of adopt the same mentality as with the ombudsman, for example. But
yeah,
what from your knowledge, what does OFLOG say about sort of the lack of legal powers and the formality around that?
Well, Lord Morse was clear on this at the committee. He said that OFLOG has no legal power to compel local authorities to undertake recommendations in the report. So it contrasts with the best value regime and the interventions that we've seen from government. However, he says if a council does not listen to the body, and this was a curious thing, it will turn to stewardship colleagues within government. And he went on to say, because I didn't quite understand what this meant. He said, we expect councils to commit to a plan of action to deal with failures. If at some point that doesn't happen, we don't have the legal power to compel. But what we do have is friends in government who will be the next port of call if we're not able to be effective, he said. So I think that in a nutshell, what he's saying there is that, yes, it's a sort of light touch approach first, but if they did find themselves dealing with a failure that required further action, then the more formal statutory avenues and pathways may be the ones that they will go down or ask others to go down.
Yeah, that's definitely a nod to formal intervention, isn't it? But I still concern myself around the overlap between A, the role of the ombudsman, and B, the role that the LGA play, for instance, peer reviews and things like that. It just seems there's like an additional structure level in this. And I think it's laudable that there's an attempt being made to try and help local authorities objectively consider their positions, but I still think there's a lot of unknowns here, and as I understand it as well, in terms of any potential failings that might be identified. And again, it will be interesting to see the extent to which AI might play out in that, Dennis, because of course this is statistical data we're talking about at the end of the day. But they're going to visit councils, OFLOG have said. Is that correct?
Indeed it is. So what you can see here, what's emerging is there are a range of informal steps, which I think we all recognise need to be taken before statutory and more formal mechanisms are engaged. There is this part of the journey before the statutory interventions that is probably worthwhile to explore. And if OFLOG do this, then that will be fine. I think that would be something that would be acceptable to the sector, to the commentators who've been critical about the role of OFLOG and how they've explained themselves at these very early stages. But I think the litmus test for OFLOG will be how they demonstrate. And I think it is for them to demonstrate through the actions of their officials when they enter into these conversations with local authorities. The litmus test is that they demonstrate independence from government. I think that is the thing that commentators, managers, senior people in local government are looking for.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's probably just hit on the biggest issue out of all this conversation is the independence of the entity. And I think it comes at a time when the relationship between central and local government isn't exactly on the best footing, is it, Dennis? The intent is to have open transparency. Of course, local government has a number of requirements on it, far more than central government, indeed, when it comes to transparency. But it's not always easy, is it, I think, to find, or it might not be presented in a way in which the general public who don't work within the machinery of it can comprehend in the way in which perhaps they should. So I
think you've raised something that I think is in the back of all of our minds. If as a result of this, Helen, there is more understanding of what's happening in local government, and if that understanding can be communicated to a wider range of people, After all of these mechanisms are not just for one set of officials to inform another set of officials working in local government. Councillors, stakeholders, everyone who works in local government has an interest
That's right.
in the problems of local government, and in particular in the financial issues, and especially those circumstances that lead to, in effect, economic failure within a local authority. This isn't just a matter of technical failure. It's a matter of it spawns a widespread range of issues, and a lot of people have an interest in understanding what's happening. So if OFLOG serves a purpose in that respect, that will be all to the good, in my opinion.
No, I definitely agree with that, because I think a lot, I mean, we're not focused on the Debate Not Hate campaign here at the moment, but when we look at the rise in abuse and harassment, there's lots of reasons that feed into that, people being angry and just generally. But actually, a lot of it stems from this sort of misconception that there's some sort of, corruption, or, the removal of discretionary services, and a real failure to sort of grasp why these hard decisions are having to be made. And that's not to say that people can't, be moved emotionally by something that personally affects them. Of course they can. But if it goes some way, like you said, to trying to educate individuals as to why local authorities have to make decisions, the parameters within which they work, all to the good, like you said, Dennis. So
I think this is a key point, because we've seen reports recently and during the course of the last few days about the impact of the intervention at Birmingham and the deep cuts that have taken place in discretionary services, in what they mean in terms of impact upon neighbourhoods, upon arts, locally, theatres, orchestras, all of the whole range of things that make society a good society to live within. The quality things that happen within our communities that local authorities support, many of those will disappear from Birmingham, and were highlighted in the press over this weekend. The depth of change that will take place as a result of what's happened, for example, in Birmingham, is very significant for local people and for local communities, as I say, for a whole raft of reasons, not just those that I mentioned, but they have been highlighted this weekend. Leisure centres, other things that people in the community depend on. Yeah. There's going to be a massive reduction in Birmingham, and that's the end product of all of this discussion of failure and intervention and so forth. So OFLOG could have a role here in explaining the wider and longer term impact of some of the things that might happen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for discussing that today. And for our listeners, don't forget you can get many more items from the bulletin, and indeed by listening to our Grapevine podcast. So on that note, it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.